Okay, great. There we go. Okay, welcome. Welcome everyone to this webinar today on leveraging A/B tests to enhance communication effectiveness. Today we have our speaker, Dr. Matthew Isaac. He is the Thomas F. Gleed Chair of Business Administration and Chairperson of the Marketing Department at the Albert School of Business and Economics at Seattle University. He teaches Introduction to Marketing, Sales Management, Brand Management, Integrated Marketing Communications, and Marketing Strategy to undergraduate and graduate students. Dr. Isaac's research focuses primarily on consumer judgment and decision-making, and he is particularly interested in understanding how individuals make inferences about communicators' motives and how numerical information affects consumer evaluations and decisions. His work has been published in leading scientific journals and widely featured in business and popular press, including Harvard Business Review, Financial Times, Time, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and The Atlantic. And he writes a blog on numerical cognition for Psychology Today. He is also the director of the Institute for Public Relations Behavioral Research Insight Center. With that, a few housekeeping notes before I turn it over. This is being recorded. It will be available for playback within 24 hours, and it will be emailed to you all as well. If you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, please leave them in the Q&A or chat feature. We will relay that to Matthew and have a Q&A section at the end of the session. If you have any tech difficulties, just let me know and we'll resolve any of those. And with that, I'll hand it over to Matthew to get started. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you, Brittany, and thanks to everyone for joining for this webinar. Really, I'm looking forward to a discussion around A/B tests today. So thanks again for being here. All right, so I will jump in by first just sharing with you an example from some of my own research that will get the ball rolling in terms of what experiments are and how they are used. I think people on this call are probably familiar with experiments and A/B tests, but just to get everyone on the same page, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about first some of my research, and then we'll shift over to talk about online A/B tests. So I have a new paper that's coming out in the Journal of the Association of Consumer Research in a special issue on consumer privacy. This is work with a team of fabulous co-authors. The lead author is a PhD student at the University of South Carolina, Julia Van de Sant. So the work basically started and was motivated by this question that a lot of firms really want to gain access to personal data. It makes sense. They feel that it's good for them. They can boost their profitability if they have more information about customers, but it isn't necessarily purely evil. They do, in many cases, think that they're going to be able to provide greater customization and deliver superior value to customers if they have this information. Of course, the challenge is that consumers may not want to share this information, even with companies that they know or are familiar with. Lots of consumers, for good reason, may harbor serious concerns about sharing their data online. So what do firms do? Well, what we've seen is that there are two strategies. One is firms try to communicate benefits. So if you share this information with me, we'll be able to provide you with more personalized content, customization, etc. So they try to explain why that information, having that information would be helpful. And then the other tactic is to promise, which is sometimes a promise that's hard to keep in the current environment, that your information will be safe, and they communicate what kinds of security measures are taken. So in our research, we examine and we find an alternative strategy that actually can hold constant the information provided, but just by restructuring the way that you ask for the information, it might actually change what customers do. So just to give you an idea, what we do in a series of experiments in the paper is we present consumers with one of two options. We basically create a laundry list, and we ask them to share information with us. And usually there's a backstory, and we provide kind of reasons for this to some extent. But it's just a straight laundry list where we're asking for information to be provided. In another condition in the experiment, we categorize the information. So we really just take the exact same information. So we're not even changing anything, but we put this information into different categories. And we compare. So we have two different groups. We have a pool of participants in the study, and we randomly assign them to either a condition where they see the uncategorized data request or they see the categorized data request. And then we look to see how many pieces of information they'll share with us. And what we find in this study is categorization seems to work better. From a firm perspective, they're able to get more information from consumers when they categorize their data. And the interesting thing is we find that this effect holds in another experiment, even when the categorization is completely meaningless. So really, we're just putting items into category A, B, C, or D, which is different from the other study I just showed you, in that there could have been some meaning for the different groupings. But even in this case where it's meaningless, putting things into categories seems to do better. Now we're publishing this work in an academic journal, so it's not enough for us to just stop there and say, hey, one does better than the other. Typically, you're trying to enhance theory, which means that we're trying to understand why this happens, right? And so the nice thing about our really tightly controlled experiments is we can ask follow-up questions to our participants in these studies afterwards to try to understand how they were making the decisions they were making. And we were able to find through a bunch of studies that we ran that there is a relationship between what we call different constructs that kind of help us explain almost psychologically why the categorized presentation seems to work better in terms of disclosure intentions. And what we find, just to quickly summarize, is that consumers, when they see this information provided in a categorized way, they make an inference about the firm in terms of the professionalism of the firm. And as a result of that inference, they actually think that the firm will keep their information more secure, and that allows them to disclose, or that makes them disclose more information. And we tested different possible paths using a mediation type analysis. And we find that that's really why it happens. It isn't that consumers think that they're going to get more benefits, more personalization from the firm that has offered categorized information. It's really this path of professionalism. Perceptions are increased, and that leads to greater disclosure intentions. So that's an example of kind of experiments at work. And I think one of the nice features of this experiment is we have a lot of control. And of course, there's downsides to these kinds of controlled experiments in that they may not always mirror reality, right? Like we did try to have some consequential variables where consumers in our studies really thought they were providing us with this information when they did. And so it was meaningful. There was skin in the game for them. But it's not the same as catching consumers online when they might be making these decisions, and there's lots of other noise and other information that's going on. So we have a lot of control, and we have this power of randomization to conditions, but it doesn't necessarily mirror as well as we would like how consumers might be making these decisions in the real world. Okay, so really, what there are some, I guess, pros and cons that I just want to highlight of the experimental method. I've talked about some of these, but we're able to like put our finger on the one thing that we care about, which in this study was whether information was provided in a categorized way, or was grouped, or as a laundry list. And so we're able to hold everything else constant and really kind of test to see what the impact of that is. So we feel really good that the differences we find are due to that manipulation. And it also allows us to explain things like why this happens. So there are good reasons why experiments are seen as this gold standard for assessing causality. We want to understand why something happens. But as I already mentioned, the setup might be a little bit artificial, stylistic. We may not have in our online pool who took these experiments, these may not be representative of the population of interest, or they may not be nationally representative. There are participants who decide to be part of these pools that we draw participants for these studies for. And it can be expensive. There are some ethical limitations, right? We can't lie to consumers in some of these studies because we have certain guidelines that we have to follow from our universities when we run these kinds of studies. Okay, so that's kind of the background on experiments, and that I've given you examples of some kind of classic kind of lab style experiments that you see in research that's done in psychology, in communications, and in marketing, typically by academics, right? But there is this idea of a trade-off between, and I've been hinting at this, between what we call internal and external validity. And that's kind of what I'm going to focus on here. So the idea of internal validity is we feel really good about this link that we've made between, in the last example, categories being categorized or uncategorized and disclosure intentions. Because we have blocked out a lot of the noise and have a lot of control, our experiment is very high in what we call internal validity. And as I mentioned, though, we aren't as confident if this will happen when people are online deciding whether they're going to share information with their bank, when they have lots of other inputs and information that's also part of their screen or in the background. Right? So our studies in that experiment are relatively lower in external validity. And there's usually this kind of trade-off. When you design a study that is really strong in internal validity, it's usually hard to also get external validity, and the opposite is true. And so to give you an example of that, I'm going to show you one more study that I've been working on for a different project. It's a working paper right now that's very different, but we ran a field experiment. And so I'll just explain what we did. We basically wanted to understand how people in this project, we want to understand how people respond to lists. So if you are going to Nashville, you might go online and you might search up best restaurants in Nashville, and you might come up with this list. So the interesting thing about this list is it's not ranked. It's not that Joe Muir is the best lunch restaurant, and it's not necessarily the case that Nashville Guru is trying to communicate that to you. But we were trying to understand in our study whether participants, nevertheless, even though there's no number or ranking provided, still kind of assume and make an inference that what is listed first is the best. And so we ended up, and so our basic question is, how do consumers make judgments from unnumbered lists? And so we are proposing and we're testing a hypothesis that people are going to make decisions as if the items were ranked, even though they're not ranked. And we call this an invisible ranking effect. Okay, and so we ran a field experiment in the Seattle area, and this is an elaborate 12-week experiment that we ran at a cheese shop. And basically, we created two versions of signs. We worked with the team at the shop, and we created two versions of signs that were displayed near the store's cash register. And each week, we trained and worked with the store employees. So they switched the signs and they tracked sales of the cheeses that we were switching each week, as well as overall cheese sales. So just to show you what this looks like, here are the two versions in our field experiment. It was called a list of staff favorites, and you can see they're not ranked, so it's not that one is more favorite than the other. But all we did was we alternated whether Bob Ross, which had the same price as Whatcom Blue, which is listed last on the top, we just varied from week to week which one was listed first versus fifth on this list. And that's all we did. And there was this placard or the sign that was shown in the store, and we tracked sales. And so what did we find? We found that consistent with our hypothesizing, I think it's easier to just look at the bullets at the bottom here. We found that when that Bob Ross cheese was vertically highest, their sales were 30% higher compared to vertically lowest. And in the Whatcom Blue case, it was 20% higher when it was vertically highest versus lowest. So that's very consistent with our theorizing, and that is really strong in external validity because this was real sales. People were making decisions, spending money in a real cheese shop. And so that's high in external validity. But the downside is that we don't really know why this happens. We have a theory as to why this is happening, and I won't go into that here. But this field experiment makes it very difficult to test any kind of explanation. We can just see a difference between these two cases or conditions. Okay, so hopefully that's provided you with some background on these different types of experiments and thinking about, internal validity and external validity and the trade-offs that we have from both. So where I want to move and where I'm going to spend, I think, the rest of my presentation here today is moving from this field study in a physical shop to thinking about digital advertising platforms. And I recognize, by the way, I should have mentioned, I'm going to be talking about advertising here. And I know I have a lot of corporate communications, PR folks in the room. I hope that you will still be able to see some uses and benefits from the kinds of things I'm talking about here. And I hope that we can have a discussion too about where you might be interested in doing these kinds of experiments or A/B tests in your world and your career towards the end of this talk. Okay, so let's talk now about field studies with digital advertising platforms. So what do I mean by that? I'll give you a couple of examples. So here is an example from a paper from a few years ago during COVID. And you can see there are two versions, two creatives of this ad. One, they look very similar. The image is identical. But in one case, it just says, protect yourself from the coronavirus. In the other case, it has this question, fear the contagion, and it talks about coronavirus as being deadly. And so in the literature, if we're thinking of like psychological constructs, you could argue that on the right, there is this concept of mortality salience, which is present on the right ad, but it's not on the left ad. And so authors might be interested to understand which is going to be most effective. So, and we'll talk in a minute about what we mean by effective in terms of these kinds of digital ads. Another example from another paper was this was actually conducted in conjunction with the Detroit Police Department, and they wanted to understand what type of advertising would be most effective at getting people to apply to advance their career and work at the police department in Detroit. And so you can see that in these cases, there's a little bit more that's different in each of the conditions or each of the different creatives, right? We have different images now. We have different language, different focus. Maybe the benefits that are communicated are more about the self. It offers many career paths and job opportunities, or more about others. You can help make a difference. You can help the people of Detroit. And some are more emotional in language. Others make an argument or a case for why that's maybe more cognitive in nature. So you can see there's a lot going on. So these are very different. So it makes it harder to kind of claim exactly what difference between each is causing a difference if we find a difference between the ads. Okay, so that's kind of what we're talking about here when we talk about digital advertising. And I just want to make the point that it's a little bit confusing. All of us have heard of A/B testing, but people use these labels and this information kind of differently. So I just want, just to get us all on the same page, I want to talk a little bit about different flavors of what that could look like. So just looking at these three columns here, you can start by thinking about what's sometimes called multiple ad study without holdout or a split test. So the basic idea there is we have two versions, let's say, of creative that we want to understand which is going to be more effective at either getting clicks or sales or whatever that might be. And so we put both of those out and we kind of compare. So that's the multiple ad study without holdout. What is a holdout? A holdout is when you actually don't serve an ad to someone in a group. And those are the two columns on the right. So holdout is if you get a pool of participants and then and so now you have the pool and you've set the pool and you randomly assign them to a treatment or a control group. And in the control group, they don't get anything. And so in the treatment group, you're either assigned a single ad. That's what the single ad study with holdout is. It's also sometimes called a lift test. Or you might have two different ads that you are sending out into the world. So there's a lot of different flavors. I'm going to focus for the rest of this talk on A/B tests, experiments. Sometimes they're called RCTs, randomized controlled trials. But really in this category where for now, you're just thinking about two ads and you want to understand which one is going to be more effective. Okay. All right. And so rather than calling them A/B tests or experiments, I'm going to refer to these as online platform studies. And these are and the reason for this is, as I just mentioned, A/B tests can be ambiguous and sort of an umbrella term. And a lot of times we run these studies on digital platforms like Meta or Google Ads or TikTok. Okay. The one thing I'll mention is this is different from a true randomized controlled trial because we don't know very much about the algorithm that Facebook or Google Ads is using when they're serving ads. And that's going to be a big issue that we'll talk about in a minute. So, of course, an alternative is to just do it yourself, right? If you wanted to, you could just go to your website and change content on your website. And so whenever anyone lands on your website, you could randomly assign them to see either creative A or creative B. So that would be really good in terms of being randomized and you'd have full control and you'd feel this is a true experiment. But the downside is you'd first have to get people to your website, right? And we don't know how they got there. And a lot of times we're interested in actually getting people to your site and so we want to go out into the broader world where people are online on social media, surfing the web, and trying to understand what's going to drive them to us. And that's why we would use Facebook or Google Ads rather than just relying on our own website. Okay, so I've kind of talked about this. People are online a lot, so researchers are really keen to understand what's going to work better, and they think that by using Facebook, Google, TikTok, who offer these tools for A/B testing, this would be a great way to understand what's more effective. And Facebook, for example, or Meta, they seem to claim that you are going to get the randomization that we really want from experiments. And they say things like test only one variable at a time, and we'll ensure that your audiences will be evenly split and statistically comparable. And so that makes it sound like you're getting something at the level that I had shown you for the initial categorization, no categorization experiment. But the question is, are we? So we can think about that with an example. Okay, so I'm going to use an example that has been used in a couple of papers. And so the first paper that looked at it looked at these two ads. One was for a human doctor, the other is for a robot doctor. Okay, and it was an academic paper. What the researchers really wanted to know was, well, do people prefer a human versus a robot doctor when it's a more embarrassing service encounter? So that was kind of their broad question, right? That's a more general question, but they tested that by using a Facebook A/B test or a split test, and they had a reach, so they had over 11,000 different participants. So what they did is they had a high embarrassment kind of language around these ads, which were focused on being overweight and obesity, check your fat percentage, that sort of thing, which they pre-tested as being language that would lead people some people to have higher levels of embarrassment. And then they had, language that was lower in embarrassment, which was more about fitness and nutritional diet. And so their prediction was that when they served an ad that kind of focused on a more embarrassing service encounter, people would prefer to click on the robot ad because they wouldn't then feel that they would have to interact with a human being. Okay. So what did they find? That's kind of what they found. So this is showing click-through rates. So again, Facebook served up ads, and there are certain features in Facebook A/B tests where you can indicate who you want to receive these ads in some ways, like UK, US participants, etc. So there's a few levers you can pull. But what they found was a difference in click-through rates where, as they predicted, in the high embarrassment language, the robot ad was more effective. And that was significantly different compared to the human doctor ad at driving clicks, getting people to click. In the low embarrassment case, this was not statistically different. Okay, so what they concluded is yes, this actually makes a difference based on this Facebook A/B test. More recently, a study was conducted that tried to replicate and extend on this work, and what they did was they ran 3 A/B tests simultaneously on Meta, and they just focused on the robot and human ad. Okay, and Meta gives you options where you can optimize on different metrics. And they basically budgeted $200 for each test, $100 to each of the ads. And so what Meta is trying to do is it's trying to optimize, and they ended up getting this many impressions. Okay, so let me explain the different metrics that they used. So they first tried to optimize based on what they call link clicks, which is really just, you're telling Meta, try to get as many people to click on each of these ads as you can. That's the focus. You're trying to get clicks. The other option is impressions, where you're trying to most cost effectively get the most number of eyeballs. So that could be reach, which is the number of people, as well as frequency, how many times they see the ad. Both of them count as impressions. And so you're trying to cost effectively get to maximize impressions for the ad. And the third thing is something called a reach with frequency cap. And you can think about this as, well, we want to make sure the same person isn't seeing the ad multiple times. So if you have a frequency cap of 1, you really should be trying to get as many different people to see your ad as possible. So Meta allows you to kind of optimize in different ways. And so these researchers, they ran 3 different A/B tests. Okay, so there's a lot of information here, but I'm going to kind of just walk you through kind of some of the key things to take away. So the first thing is when you look at basically click-through rate, clicks divided by impressions, they replicate what we had seen in that other paper. Robots, again, this was an embarrassing ad or an embarrassing situation, and the robot ad seemed to do better. So that's good. That seems to suggest that this is true, that if you are trying to get people to click and you're healthcare focused and it's an embarrassing situation, hey, you should use a robot ad. That's the conclusion you might get from it. Now we have two studies that have shown this. And even if you use a slightly different measure of click-through rate, it's not quite significant, but you get a similar kind of pattern. So that might seem pretty good. But I want to highlight, though, a couple of things that are really key. So let me go here. So the first is that there seems to be some differences, first in this idea of frequency, which is impressions per reach. That means that the human ad was actually getting served to people, to the same person more often. So on average, a person who got a human ad was seeing it 1.36 times. The robot ad, it was 1.27 times. That's not great from an experiment standpoint, right? You want to be doing the same thing. And in a true experiment, you're doing everything the same. You're just changing that one thing of interest. Even worse, Meta provides some summary stats back, and you can see that the proportion of women that were exposed to the human ad versus the robot ad was very different. So women were getting the human ad much more. Men were getting the robot ad relatively more. And that kind of makes sense if you look at men were more likely to click on the robot ad, that's the 1.34%, compared to women. So men are more likely to click on the robot ad. Women are slightly more likely to click on the human ad. So what is Meta's algorithm? Remember, it's a black box that we don't really know how it's working, but of course it's trying to optimize. And so what it's going to do is it's going to serve that robot ad to more men. It's going to serve the human ad to relatively more women. And so that causes a real breakdown in the idea of what an experiment should be doing. So hopefully this gives you some sense that we're not just taking the same group and giving them one ad or another and then comparing. We're actually serving different people and maybe at a different frequency with one ad versus the other. So it's not a real clean test. Okay, the other thing I'll just point out, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but when you optimize based on impressions or reach with a frequency cap, the click-through rate is really low. And that kind of makes sense going back to this slide. The algorithm is trying to maximize impressions. So it doesn't care if you click or not, right? So it got 62,000 impressions of the ad for that $100, right? So it did its job, but it didn't care that no one was basically clicking. So it's serving these ads to people that are never going to click on it. And in the reach with CAP, you see you also get a lot of people, and it's almost identical, which makes sense. We capped it at 1, so these are 59,000 unique people are seeing the ad, but boy, no one is clicking. All right, so this is an example of what we call divergent delivery. Which is a problem with trying to run an experiment or an A/B test. We're not satisfying some of the conditions that we should have for a true experiment. Um, you can see the age is pretty close in the human versus robot case. So, but again, these are only the things we can observe, right? Like we can only observe because this is the data we get back from Meta, age and gender. But I would be willing to bet that someone who in their history has shown more interest in science and technology is more likely to receive a robot ad compared to a human ad. And that again makes it hard to make a causal claim as to the robot ad is more effective and for this reason. All right. Another issue is around user reactions. So a lot of times with these Facebook ads, what happens is um, you can like it, you can put a comment on it. And so what's happening is the ad isn't actually staying constant for everyone who sees it. All of those likes and comments show up for the subsequent person who is seeing this ad. So what's happening is it's again not a true uh, experiment because you now have different things changing. So you can imagine if um, you get more comments or more likes on one ad initially, that could affect then the responses of subsequent people who are exposed to the ad. It's not just the ad itself, it's all of these other user reactions that are also affecting how they respond. So that's also a problem for a true experiment. And I'll skip through this here because I want to save some time for questions, but there's some examples of that even in this data, small sample, but there are different reactions that there's more in the human side, and those are now tagged there, and they're going to be kept there for subsequent users who get exposed to the ad. So that could be a problem. The stimuli is not consistent. All right, so just to kind of summarize some of the key things from this study and this kind of case study here around the robot and human doctor. This divergent delivery problem compromises internal validity. So we can't make this causal claim and say, hey, what's really giving us this difference in clicks is the fact that it was a robot ad compared to a human ad because there's other things going on, including, as I mentioned, user reactions. So I'm definitely not saying that there's not a place for these online platform studies, but I think it's really important for academics as well as practitioners to know they're not a fully random experiment, so they have some important limitations. And we don't really know how that algorithm, the machine learning, the AI that's kind of going into everything that Facebook is doing to determine which ad you get, how it works. It really is a black box. And so as researchers, we have to be really careful about that when we're trying to decide what to do going forward. Yeah, it violates kind of some of our assumptions when we run these studies. Okay, so to summarize, I really want to kind of focus on what's in the red here, which is that we're not just testing A versus B when we are doing these online platform studies. We are testing A, the robot, plus the optimization that Facebook is doing around that, that's happening in a way that we don't necessarily know, and then any reactions that might occur on that ad versus B, the human doctor, the optimization that's going on plus the reactions. So it's not just an A versus B test, right? Okay, and then yeah, just here I would just highlight again that a lot of people, I think most people are focused on click-through rates, which makes sense because if you try to optimize and use these studies for impressions or capped reach, yes, you'll get a lot of impressions, you'll get a lot of capped reach, but is that really buying you what you want? It depends on what your goal is, but usually you'd want to see some sort of engagement with the ad, not just an impression or exposure. And from these studies, the click-through rates are really low when you optimize on these other dimensions. Um, and I've already talked about this idea that even if you don't see divergent delivery in gender and age, there could be those unobservable things going on, like whether well, what I mentioned before, if you're a science tech person and that's in your search history, you're going to get the robot ad. But we won't be able to see that in the data that Meta, for example, gives back to us. Okay, so if you take away one thing from this talk, it's that you shouldn't presume that there is causality when you're running these kinds of A/B tests using a digital advertising platform. They might be useful, but they are not causal. So you shouldn't make a causal inference, and you should be careful about what you don't know about the algorithm. So it's not an experiment. Okay, so what I recommend is I think experiments are great, and I think they can help us understand why something is happening if they're done right. And it also depends on, the trade-off you try to make between internal and external validity. In the best case, you want to look for both lab style experiments or field experiments that don't have this problem of divergent delivery, because that compromises your interpretation. So OPS, the online platform studies, have high external validity, right? Because we're seeing this happen in actual clicks in the real world, but they're not great in terms of causality. If you're going to use them, I suggest what we do in a lot of academic research is it's a convergence story. We might run some lab studies, then we might run a field experiment physically, and then maybe also run something digitally, and we'll try to see if we see convergence across all of those different ways, because there's limitations for each kind of research you do. So if you're finding the same pattern of results across everything, then that gives you a little bit more confidence in what your result is. So the takeaway, it's a useful tool if you are thinking about researching customers or even using in your communication strategies, but it is not the be all end all. I will include this if you're interested in some of the sites and some of the work that I've mentioned. There's a bunch of more academic style papers to look at. I also include, there's a short podcast that talks about this problem of divergent delivery. So I'll make sure that this can be shared with you if you are interested in any of this. And I think with that, I will stop there. If you have questions about this or you're thinking about anything related to A/B tests, please feel free to reach out to me. I think we still have about 18 minutes for any questions that anyone might have.
Sweet. Yes, we have a question from Lucas Held. They say, thank you for a terrific presentation with great examples and clear explanation. Their question is, generally speaking, what magnitude of variation should we expect between high performing ads versus low performing ads? And what drives the difference?
It's a great question. It's a little bit difficult to answer because it's sadly, and it depends kind of answer, right? Like I think, finding a click-through rate of 1% or even slightly below 1% is pretty strong. Some of the things I showed you, like when you're optimizing for impressions and you're getting a 0.04%, is obviously not very good. But it is going to depend very much on the specific context, and of course the different levers that you can pull and try to optimize around, and cost, right? Like you are also deciding how much you're going to spend on these tests. So I don't know if I have a great answer to what the gap would be. Certainly, I think to find something that is statistically different, you would want to see, a difference of probably 0.2 or 0.3% would be enough to find a difference if you're running a long enough test. But it's going to vary by the situation. I think in the example I showed where there was a significant difference, it was something like 1.3% versus 0.7% for the click-through rate. So that was about a 0.6 difference. Hope that helps.
Awesome. And then we have another question. How does valid A/B testing with the recommendations you cited fit with other forms of gathering insight from consumers, for example, focus groups?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think our toolbox should use a lot of first qualitative. So first, it depends on the goal, right? Like I think with all this kind of research, it depends on what your specific goal is. I think focus groups and interviews and can really help with depth. So, if you're trying to explore and understand like how consumers are thinking about or how employees are thinking about something you're trying to do, those are amazing because you get the kind of richness and depth that you really can't get as much when you're trying to do a survey or an experiment. Survey or the experiment is going to be more quantitative. You are usually trying to do some sort of confirmation of a hypothesis. Not always, especially in practice, you might just have two creatives and you want to see which one works better. But in academia, you usually have some theory where you think this will work better because it talks about mortality salience or something like that, right? Like you'll have some clear prediction. And then in those cases, I think a valid A/B test or an experiment is a really good way to show that causality. So the short answer is I think all of these different types of research have their place. It really depends on the question. If you're, early on trying to validate a concept or understand how consumers might respond to a new offering or new positioning, getting the depth that you can only get from a focus group, from an interview, and maybe from some social listening. Like there's now a lot of great ways to kind of mine language and text from various platforms online, and then you can get some richness there. But then otherwise, if you're trying to understand the impact of a specific creative, etc., then I think an experiment or maybe a survey would make more sense.
Okay, awesome. We have another question from Barbara. Assuming that you're a practitioner, how would you recommend setting up testing for message effectiveness?
So in an ideal world, you wouldn't want to have as much control over that test as possible, right? Like when you give up control to a publisher or to a platform like a Meta, you won't see what's in their black box, and it's really not in their interests to stop optimizing, right? Like it's from a monetary perspective, they're never going to say, well, I won't try to optimize here on something. And so whatever you can do to get as much control as possible is the gold standard, because then you will know this is our pool of participants, and you'll feel very confident that you have used your own process of random assignment to put participants in one condition or another. And that's the key to causal inference, to have true random assignment to groups. So if you're able to do that yourself, that's the best. It's sometimes hard. And as I talked about with the example on your company website, that's great and it's valuable, but it's only helpful to you to understand what people who already are on your website are going to prefer in terms of one copy versus another. And your question or interest might be to know what potential customers might think, and you might not be able to do that on your own website or to test that on your own website. I hope that helps answer that question.
Awesome, thank you. She says it does help. Does anybody else have any questions before we conclude the webinar? I'm sure if you all would like more information about this research or any of his other research, his information is on the screen, and we're going to share the version of this deck and the webinar recording on our website and YouTube channel. I'll definitely be sure to email it out to everyone. If you all have any questions, or I know that sometimes
some people might want a, I guess, showing that you have attended the webinars. Just let me know if you have any questions. I'm just here to help and be a resource, and I'm sure Matthew is as well. And but with that, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, Matthew, for being here and sharing that with us.
Yes, thanks everyone for joining, and please feel free to reach out if you have questions or want any more information on this topic.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye.